We are very pleased and honored to welcome you here today at the Asia Pacific Research Center. We're so pleased to have Tim Arundel Aris here with us to talk about both the situation of incarceration of his mother, Aung San Suu Kyi, as well as the humanitarian crisis unfolding on, or not unfolding, underway on many registers in Myanmar, heightened, of course, recently by the tragic events of the earthquake that I'm sure that all of you are aware of, worsening an already dire humanitarian condition of an ongoing civil war that has displaced millions of individuals, to say nothing of renewed fighting in Rakhine State, the continued plight of more than 1 million Rohingya refugees in neighboring Bangladesh and fleeing to other countries in the region. And with a regional organization, ASEAN, at a loss as how to cope with the generals in the junta who have been resistant to all efforts from ASEAN to achieve some sort of resolution of the ongoing conflict. So we have here with us today someone who has sort of stepped out of private life in recent years to become an advocate, both for improving the conditions or obtaining the release of Aung San Suu Kyi, as well as engaging in humanitarian-related efforts to assist in easing the conditions under which the population of Myanmar are suffering due to the civil war and all of the other ongoing events. So please join me in welcoming our speaker today, who I think will sort of chat with us informally to begin with, and then we will open things up for discussion in this fireside chat. So welcome and thank you for coming to join us today.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here and talk with you today, not as a politician, but as a son. For 4 years now, I have received only one letter from my mother. I've not had any other communication from her. For 4 years, she has been kept in complete isolation. As far as we know, she has been held in solitary confinement, her voice silenced, her fate unknown. I don't really know where she is, but we believe she is in Naypyidaw prison. Whether she is safe or not, that's another question, or if she's even receiving any medical care. For decades, I've remained in the background, respecting my mother's wishes to keep me shielded from politics. But I can no longer stay silent, not when Burma, my mother's beloved country, is being torn apart. Not when an entire generation of young people are being robbed of their future. My mother, Aung San Suu Kyi, has spent a quarter of her life imprisoned for her unwavering belief in democracy and human rights. During the student uprising in 1988, my mother stood by the brave young leaders as they fought for the democracy and peace they deserved. At 80 years old this year, she now sits in solitary confinement, cut off from the world. But this isn't just about her. Her isolation mirrors the suffering of Burma itself. Since the coup in 2021, Burma has become one of the world's worst humanitarian disasters, with over 6,500 civilians killed, 22,000 people imprisoned, including students, journalists, activists, women, and children. More than 3.5 million displaced from their homes, and 15 million facing food shortages, and a further 2 million at risk of famine. The recent devastating earthquake in Burma has further compounded an existing crisis, leaving affected communities in dire need of assistance. However, the illegalization of local on-the-ground rescue and aid efforts, coupled with severe access restrictions imposed by the junta, has obstructed critical time-sensitive aid from reaching those most affected. It will be too late for many of them now. Even worse, while people are struggling to survive, the military dictatorship continues airstrikes on its own people, even in zones affected by the earthquake. The junta has no capacity to provide emergency assistance to save lives. Following the coup, its disaster relief funds were misused for other purposes. Additionally, the regime has a proven record of politicizing and weaponizing foreign aid. Donors must be extremely cautious when providing cash or in-kind assistance to ensure that aid reaches those in need and is not manipulated by the junta for its own benefit. These are not political issues, they are matters of life and death. But the junta is not just waging a war on its own people, it is waging a war on its future. Under my mother's leadership, education and youth empowerment were national priorities. She believed in the power of young minds to shape a better Burma. She donated her entire Nobel Prize award to Prospect Burma, a foundation that funds scholarships for Burmese students. During this trip to the US, I was moved to meet Prospect Burma alumni, now in key professional positions, and learn about their achievements and how they are positively impacting their communities. Burma's democracy was only budding, fragile, and imperfect, yet full of promise and opportunities for young people to hope and dream for a better Burma. But today, the military bombs schools, imprisons students, and forces young people into its ranks. Students who once dreamt of becoming doctors and engineers took up arms and are now resistance fighters in the People's Defense Forces. Young men and women are conscripted into the junta's military. Airstrikes kill children in classrooms. Youth activists face arrest, torture, and execution simply for speaking out. The regime is systematically erasing an entire generation, denying them education, opportunities, and the right to dream of a better future. What can be done and what must be done? We cannot wait for another decade to pass before the world takes action. We need immediate humanitarian access and free humanitarian access to everybody who is trying to help. The US must push for medical care for my mother and all political prisoners. Stronger sanctions and diplomatic pressure. The junta and its international arms suppliers must face consequences. Support for civil society and independent media. Without funding, Burma's people will lose their last source of truth. Free, non-discriminatory access for emergency life-saving humanitarian relief for those affected by the earthquake, war victims, displaced families, and those struggling to survive. Many of you here at this, one of the world's most prestigious universities, you have access to knowledge, freedom, and opportunities that young people in Burma can only dream of. But education is not just a privilege, it is a responsibility. We need your voices. We need your advocacy, because silence is what allows oppression to thrive. So, what can you do? Well, you can start by raising awareness, share Burma's story, tell your friends, professors, and networks, talk about Burma in the classroom and beyond. Contact your officials, urge lawmakers to join the Congressional Burma Caucus and take stronger action. Support trusted organizations, donate to humanitarian relief, medical aid, and independent journalism in Burma. We can share a few trusted sources. This is not just about my mother. It is about the millions of young people in Burma who want the same things as you do. Chance to learn, to dream, to build a life of dignity. We are at a turning point. The choices we make now will decide whether Burma's youth have a future at all. I ask you, will you stand with them? Will you use your voices, your privilege, your platform to demand change? I believe you will. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think now we will open things up to questions, if you're willing to address questions from the floor. So,
sure.
Great. Who would like to begin? Yes, Kia.
Thank you very much for this very serious natural disaster, earthquake that just happened. In that aftermath, we watch a lot of news feeds about how the U.S. not being present with the USA is cut is affecting the aid rescue efforts. And there's a vacuum, and China is stepping up to its credit and providing a lot of support to people in Myanmar. And at the risk of sounding a little inappropriate, we cannot help but think about the geopolitical consequences from something like that. The US creating a vacuum, China stepping in, that's a familiar theme in the region. And I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about, I know this is not necessarily your area of expertise, but the relationship between the military leaders, dictators, and China, and to what extent China has a hold over them. And if it's not that strong a relationship, what can other actors, whether it's the United States or Japan or Southeast Asian countries, what can they do to have more of an influence on Myanmar's leaders?
Well, unfortunately, the military doesn't have a moral compass like we know of, except for other people. And despite the fact that China has engaged with them for decades now and provided them with support to militarize them against their own people for years, China has always wanted to play both sides to some degree. So over the course of the coup, we've seen them working with different ethnic armed organizations, and we've seen them working with the military. I can only say that their relationship with Min Aung Hlaing is not a good one. And they have actually requested access to Meme over this past 4 years, and they've been denied that. And recently I've heard that they had aid organizations or a team within Burma which was shot upon by the military. So they are not at all happy with what's happening there now. At the same time, like you say, they are filling this vacuum which America has left. So that's a very worrying development. We think that, especially with the free journalism, which has been cut off from funding by the Americans now, that leaves an opening for China. And who knows what could come of that. The whole world's in upheaval at the moment. And what's happening here is one thing, but we need to be very careful moving forwards what's been said and done about what's happening, because people are losing their freedoms the world over. And if we don't stand up now, we'll find that we've lost ours before long. I don't know if that answered your question, but I don't know geopolitical politics or ins and outs, things like that. I never came to this as someone who's educated in politics or even someone who's paid particular attention to it over the years. I'm simply here as my mother's son. And that's not any qualification other than the fact that I've lived with this for decades.
Other than US and China, whether it's Japan or EU, South Korea, Australia, Indonesia, what other countries could do more?
They could all do more. Yeah, they say a lot, but they don't do much. Yeah, and sure, people are helping behind the scenes where they can, but they need to make it more obvious what they're doing and why. You know, we're standing up against a brutal military regime, which is essentially a terrorist organization who's worked with other terrorist organizations. Yeah, and we're accepting the rise of authoritarianism the world over. We need to be very careful.
Yes, Keita. Yeah.
About your views with respect to whether or not ASEAN as an organization could have done more.
Of course, they could have done more. Yes.
In the midst of its mandate, what do you think could have been done differently?
I'm afraid I couldn't answer that technical. You know, I'm not qualified for that, but they could have done so much differently. They allow trading under the table with the military still. Even though there's sanctions in place, they still allow funding to trickle through under the table. They do not uphold those sanctions.
Could you perhaps comment a little bit further on that in terms of, you were suggesting the need for advocacy. My colleague mentioned Japan, South Korea, the EU, and so forth. But what steps do you think could be taken in advocacy to make ASEAN more effective as the regional organization whose charter is based upon principles of security and so forth, and which has taken what for ASEAN is the unprecedented step of disinviting the junta leaders from the ASEAN summit, which has had little effect, of course.
Yes, I was very surprised to hear that they'd invited Min Aung Hlaing. That was a step backwards, and it legitimizes him, which they should not be doing in any way. They should not be engaging with him as a legitimate political entity.
So, but what's your view, for example, you know, ASEAN has been operating on the basis of the sort of 5-point agreement, and Thailand, for example, has been seeking to find other ways of opening dialogue with the junta. Do you think that's a good development, or does it worry you, or what's your view?
It does worry me, because this, again, legitimizes what is a terrorist organization. This is not a democratically elected government, and people should not be engaging with them in that way at all. They should be engaging with the NUG and other political parties within Burma. Now that the military is no longer in control of more than 30% of the landmass, we cannot say that that is the ruling body. There are so many others there who have done so much over this last 4 years, who have started to develop their own forms of government. So it's time for people to start engaging with them. We know that any aid that goes in via the military does not reach the people it needs to get to. It only benefits the generals and their cronies. So by engaging with others like the NUG and listening to what they're saying and working with them openly, that would help.
Thank you. Please.
Right. Thanks. But building on what you were just saying, as you know, the military now only controls about 30% of the country, but the rest of the country is under divided government in various ways. So you have the NUG, but also other parties who are trying to come up with some sort of post-conflict settlement looking ahead. And of course, the earthquake scrambles all of that. But I'm curious, I know you've said that you're not a politician, a political scientist, that this has been not so much your ambit, but you've clearly followed closely. So looking back at your mother's administration prior to the coup, and then looking ahead for this rebuilding, what do you think perhaps her government could have done differently that might have precluded some of the problems that came to pass? And what would you see as the key priorities?
I'm afraid to say, I don't think that she could have done much differently, actually. I think she was doing everything within her power, which was limited. People forget that this was a parallel government. This wasn't a united, this wasn't the democracy that we all think of as democracy. This is the military working alongside a democratically elected government and working against it. Okay.
So taking that into account, moving forward, what would you identify as the key priorities for those who are trying to negotiate a new federation agreement, a new plan moving forward, building on that experience? How Indonesia found ways to work around and undercut that military leadership, for instance?
If I knew that, then I would be a better person than my mother or her father, because people have been trying to unite the ethnic armed organizations, well, the different ethnicities for decades now. And it's such a complex job. Yeah. And I'm not the one who has those answers, I'm afraid to say. But over the course of this coup, we have seen them working together better than they've ever worked before, in a military capacity anyway. Politically speaking, they're very divided still. But the fact is, since they had that brief period of democracy, the people of Burma will not accept military rule going forwards. And that's the first thing, that's the first hurdle. We have to get the military out so that then we can adjust the constitution to allow for social and economic reform. This is what my mother was trying to do, and that's what's going to be needed going forwards.
Hi, since you're not into politics specifically, this question may be more up your alley. What was it like growing up with the woman who became a Nobel Prize winner?
I knew no other childhood, so it was normal. And I realized that it may seem like a fairly different childhood to many, but I find that when I know what's happening to people in Burma on a daily basis, I think, well, my life's pretty easy, really. And despite the fact I've had some things I've had to contend with over the years, it's nothing compared to what they're going through.
Yes, over here.
Before your mother was in house arrest or in prison, when you were younger, not this recent time, did you have access to her?
I was with her when she was first put under house arrest. I guess I was 12 years old at the time. And we were allowed more access, not always, but depending on who was in charge at the time, because it was over 15 years she was under house arrest. They would allow us to get her care packages, and we would be able to communicate with letters and even sometimes phone calls. And at points we were even allowed to go and stay with her. I would be semi under house arrest at that time as well with her. So certainly we had more access then. And knowing that she was in her own home is so much better than not really knowing where she is, but believing she's in a god-awful prison in Naypyidaw.
Information about the Japanese support during the earthquake? Do they?
No, I don't know how they've been supporting us.
Other questions? Over here.
10 years ago that your mom and you were visiting Bangladesh, and I had the rare opportunity to come and meet you at the Burmese Council's residence, Mohinga, their famous favorite dish of Burmese. I had told my son at the time, he was fairly young, I think he was very young also. And I told him about General Aung San, or Bojo Aung San, And the first thing he said to your mom was, I know all about your Aung San. And I had the rare opportunity to meet you. You were very young. And that night we came also to the residence of the Bhutanese ambassador and met you again. And that's why I took great pains to come to this meeting, because yesterday there was just too many people. And we had a hard time trying to find a parking place, but I made it. My friend is still looking for parking, but I am very grateful to have this opportunity to meet you. Another thing I want to stress is I'm doing my own fundraising online, very private, just among my friends. And as of today, I'm still waiting for checks, but it's close to $2,000. And I have my own secure place to convey the necessary financial aid. And I've had videos of how the money was used. So that's another option for people who really want to help our motherland and my birth country. I was born in Mandalay. So thank you for giving me this privilege to come and meet you in person.
So,
Okay. I hope you have a nice stay in the United States.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kim. My name is Coco. I don't want to ask you about the geopolitical question because you said that you are the mother of the politician. You are the son of the politician. So I want to ask you about a universal question. What is the relationship between you and your mom? First one. And what is the last word? I mean, the last word that you saw her personally, what's the last word she left for you? And what will be your first word when you see your mom again? Thank you.
well, it's not been easy having her leave me when I was very young, but that hasn't stopped our relationship being a strong one. I've always supported her in what she's been doing. And I know she's not just doing it for the people of Burma, she's also doing it for me. You know, she wants a better world for me as well. And she's doing it because she believes it's what's right. So she's doing it for herself as well. And I'm very proud of what she's done. So sometimes we may disagree on some things, like all families do, but that's normal. And like I said, I believe that I've had a pretty normal life. People have looked up to her as an icon over the years, but to me, she's always just been my mother. And she knows I support her, even though I don't get involved with politics. I've had to step up over the last 4 years to try and do what I can to help her. And there isn't anyone else who's in quite the same position as I am. So despite the fact I may not be qualified, I can only do what I can do. And when I see her next, well, the last words I've had from her was the letter that I got from her almost 2 years ago. I'm not going to share the contents of that letter. It was just personal family matters. We talk about children and what have you. But when I see her, I'll just tell her, you know, how much the whole family's been missing her and how much we love her.
The whole populations of Burma love you too.
Thank you.
Where? Mike, please.
Don Emerson, former head of Southeast Asia program. If this question has already been asked and you have answered it, then don't answer it again. Unfortunately, I was quite late in coming to your talk. The question is this. in a very distorted, unfortunate way, one might say that Myanmar and the United States are both undergoing very different, I emphasize that, very, very different internal crises. One might say multiple crises. And here you are in the United States. I assume that you either have been in Washington or may intend to go to Washington. Do you have any shred of optimism that the United States can do something with regard to the situation in Myanmar? Not just the political, but the whole thing. I mean, it's a disastrous, what's happening in Mandalay and so forth. Are you able, do you think, to extract some kind of support from the United States? Or is the United States so deeply bound up in its own internal difficulties that you've pretty much abandoned that entirely? And if there is some opportunity, are there specifics that you have in mind that might involve the US or not?
It's a tough question. At the moment, things are in such turmoil over here that who knows what might be around the corner. But I was meeting with officials when I was in Washington and with Senator Mitch McConnell, amongst others. And I know that there are many people out there who really do want to help where they can. It's just that right now they're very overwhelmed with what's happening here, and they don't know what might be around the corner, but they are saying that they will support me where they can.
Other over here, please. Oh.
How many Burmese live in United States? And also, I would like to know the level of their fear for being active in fear of the juntas, military. Because I give just one example. I, as Iranian were in the beginning was very afraid to be active even outside because of the fear of the regime. But now they don't care anymore. How is the level of the Burmese being afraid of regime?
Well, we've always been afraid of the regime because they take action against our families back in Burma and seize all the assets that you might have left in the country. And the fact that now with America making it harder for people to stay here, it's likely they'll get deported back there and end up in prison and being tortured and even executed. So there is always going to be that fear. But despite that, the Burmese diaspora over here have really shown a huge amount of support and work all the time tirelessly to do everything they can to make sure that we do not lose this war. How many Burmese are here? 240,000 or something more? I think that's right, around that.
Are there measures taken right now?
Sorry, you'll have to speak up. I'm rather hard of hearing.
All right. Are there any measures taken right now for the release of your mom? What avenues have been done? Not just you, but as the Burmese. Do you know of any avenues taken that's effective?
Well,
Release.
everybody has been calling for Mehmet's release.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that Min Aung is going to listen because he's got personal issues with her. And the fact that he would rather keep her as a bargaining chip.
Oh, that is sad, but I do believe truth will triumph in the end.
Truth will triumph.
Truth will triumph.
But only if we work for it.
Yes, but I think each and every individual, the Burmese.
If we just sit back whilst these people spread lies and disharmony and discord amongst others, then the truth won't triumph.
All the way in the back.
Yes. My
My name is Sharad Lin. I'm with Human Agenda and the San Jose Peace and Justice Center. And I was wondering whether you could shed a little bit of light. You know, some years ago, it was reported that your mother apparently was declining to take a position on the Rohingya.
That's lies.
Okay, so
She was doing everything she could for the Rohingya.
Okay.
She was doing things for the Rohingya before it even came to the attention of the international community. She was trying to make sure that everybody in Burma had a place, not just the Rohingya, but all the different ethnicities. And that meant that she was put in a very difficult position. And the military were working with terrorist organizations to undermine her and spreading disinformation, which the international media picked up upon and went with, which means the international media were largely responsible for what happened in that case, because they should know better than to listen to the lies that the military spread. They've been doing it for decades. Do people not learn?
Thank you for the clarification.
Went through some sort of a watershed. And it entailed a massive political reform. And it was attributable to a number of factors. The first one was the massive economic pressure by way of the Asian financial crisis. The second was the role of the university students. And the third, which I thought was quite serendipitous, was the fact that there were 2 or 3 military generals within the military who had the foresight and the vision that were necessary for bringing about reform. I'm curious to your view with respect to the role of the university students and the role of the economy, the way it's now moving in the right direction in many places around the world. And also whether there's hope for 1 or 2 personalities within the military apparatus that might see the world a little bit differently, that would bring about hope for a true political reform in Myanmar.
There's always hope. At the moment, though, I think Min Aung Hlaing has been the worst leader we've seen in decades now. So it takes quite an evil person to be worse than him. And anybody other than Min Aung Hlaing would be a start at the moment. And I think the Burmese generals will have to watch their own backs with him around. So they might be thinking it's time to move him on. The students have always done what they can, and the students are doing everything they can now. It's the young people of Burma who've really stood up to the military now. They've tasted freedom under the NLD's period, and they don't want to give it up. And now they've had much better access to communications. Country was opened up. They know what freedom's about, and they're never going to accept military rule again. The thing is Burma's seen periods where we have surges of hope, and then it all goes back in, and then you can see it again, and then it all goes back. But now, right now is the darkest period within my life.
While being the darkest period, do you think that because now there is a substantial part of the country that is no longer under the control of the military, that if that military if that coalition against the junta holds, and there's increasing military success, that is the path forward?
Well, I never like to encourage violence, especially not being my mother's son. But at the moment, it seems that that's the way things are going. I'm looking forward to when people can actually start talking again. This is what my mother was always trying to work towards, was reconciliation, and with it, truth and justice. she's a stickler for the rule of law, because that's when we can all feel like we have some safety, when there are regulations that hold people from committing atrocities against each other. And we can hope that that will happen.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned truth and justice and the rule of law. One thing that we haven't touched upon is, as you know, there's the United Nations independent mechanism for investigating crimes against humanity and war crimes in Burma. They have been collecting evidence for several years now, with a view towards the preservation of that evidence for a future international tribunal or domestic court, whatever circumstances allow, in order to hold accountable the individuals in the junta who are responsible for the violence and mass atrocity crimes that are taking place. Do you think that seeking justice in that way could be, should be an important part of how to think about the future?
I think international law should be applied to the military, but I don't know how it can be when they have nobody has any power over them. They're a rule unto themselves, and unless they say, get the paperwork ready for when Min Aung Hlaing was just in Thailand, and Thailand should have arrested the man, well, then what else is going to happen? Unless they actually take meaningful action like that, then international law doesn't really have much power.
Yeah, I mean, they are preserving the evidence for the future. And as we know, in the case of Cambodia, that took a long time, from the end of the Khmer Rouge rule in 1979 to the creation of a tribunal in 2006. But there are those who argue that the quest for international justice may undermine the attempts at reconciliation.
I would agree with that as well. My mother would have, she did say that to some degree in her speech at the Hague when she was there. And it's difficult when it can just produce more divisions within the country itself, and it's not actually being constructive. The criticism which the international community is heaping upon the democratic process in Burma is, they showed a complete lack of understanding of the sensitivities and the intricacies. And this is a very, very complex situation. It's not something that can be solved just by waving a wand. It takes decades of social and economic reform when you're dealing with these sorts of things. But people think you can just start hurling accusations and throwing names at people, and it doesn't actually help.
It's not the first time the international community has not understood the complexities of a national situation in which they involve themselves. So, yes, please. We have a couple of hands over here.
Hi, Lakshmi Sarah, KQD News. Have you met or do you have plans to meet any local or state officials while you're in California or the Bay Area?
I met the mayor of Newark yesterday. He gave me my first commendation.
Picking up on the question of a perhaps slightly more knowledgeable international audience, Malaysia, as chairs of ASEAN, has been attempting to organize some more activities, it seems, to bring together different leaders from the NUG and from the other groups who are trying to think about how to rebuild Myanmar. Malaysia's had, as you know, a long-standing stake in trying to, in the past, support Dixon Agreement and so forth, and trying to broker some sorts of agreements to overcome military leadership. Do you see this as any more promising than before, or is this ASEAN as usual?
Well, it's impossible to say unless we actually see some results from this and they uphold what they're saying. In the past, they've said many things, but not upheld it. So until we actually see them abiding by what they're talking about and standing by it, then no, it's just ASEAN being ASEAN, as far as I'm concerned.
Over here. Wait for the mic, please.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm a student from College of San Mateo. I lead a student association and also stay connected with other student leaders from California. And we always make sure to let our Burmese students know that our fight is not over just because we alone had escaped Burma, and that immigration here doesn't just mean survival but for change. Do you have any advice to amplify and uplift our students here? Can you tell us how to not lose hope?
I know it seems like Burma has been abandoned by the wider world now. And if you look at the news, often there's nothing about Burma. People don't seem to care. I've been trying to do what I can over the last 4 years to change that. I feel like I can never do enough. But I've met so many people around the world who are very passionate about Burma. And they really want to do what they can. Just because you don't see the work they're doing doesn't mean it's not happening. There's so many good people out there who are really trying to do what they can. But publicizing what they're doing would only make their work harder. So please don't feel like you're alone.
Hi, my name is Ken, but I'm asking a question for my friend, Swanita. Swan is helping me organizing this event. Swan cannot be on Zoom. He is away from the country. So he sent this question for Kim. I'm conducting research within displaced Chin communities in India. I've heard stories of tremendous hardship for all, including revolutionary soldiers, women, and youth. One thing I have heard consistently from them is that international aid has not reached them. At the same time, there are so many capable grassroots organizations led by the displaced. You're here advocating for international aid, and I want to ask, what do you think the roles of grassroots organizations are in delivering humanitarian aid when the military is incapable of doing so? Thank you.
Well, at the moment, it's the grassroots organizations who are actually doing all the good work. It's not the larger organizations. And despite the fact the military are trying to prevent them from doing so, they are risking their own lives to get in there and save people and deliver aid. I can only say that whilst I would encourage them to continue doing the great work they're doing, just to be very careful that they're not going to provide the military with more targets.
In the back.
Yeah, so one of the the regional powers that has provided military assistance to dictatorship in Myanmar has been India, and I'm wondering whether you had any discussions with the Indian government officials about their position, whether there's any sign of change.
Well, India is supposed to be the largest democracy in the world, and look how it treats its own people. They haven't been a friend of Burma in any way for many years now. I know that the people in India have supported my mother, but the government has never shown that same support. Similarly with Japan. But I do hope that, well, I know that Modi met with Min Aung Hlaing recently, which is a terrible thing. And Min Aung Hlaing also met with the Bhutanese Prime Minister, which I was extremely disappointed about. These people need to stop legitimizing this man. and start living up to the values that they're supposed to uphold. And one day we might see change in this world.
Good idea to pay just the ransom, and get your mother out?
A ransom wouldn't work with me now, line. Yeah, it's all money, but he's got enough money. Yeah, Meme is more useful to him in prison than money would be.
Mother,
I want her out, but she's the one who's never accepted any different treatment to the rest of the Burmese people. Yeah, so
free.
She wants all the political prisoners free as well, though, and she wouldn't accept her freedom before before their freedom. If you want her free, then we need to get everybody free.
Now.
She'll be 80 this year. Yeah. Sorry, I'm not the most verbose person. My answers can be quite short, but often that's all there is to say.
Well, you also said that you weren't very well qualified to speak about the situation in Myanmar, but I think everything you've said shows that indeed you are, and both extremely knowledgeable and extremely acute, and to the point in a way that I think many experts, although they may talk much longer, are often reluctant to address issues as directly as you have. And I think that's really been extremely valuable for all of us. Thank you. One other thing that I was sort of reflecting on while you were speaking was thinking about a place where I was involved a good deal for a while, which was East Timor, now Timor-Leste, and of course, which was characterized by 25 years of struggle for independence, violent, very violent conflict. One of the things that was extremely important for Timor-Leste was that in addition to the sort of military political leadership within the country that was fighting against Indonesian occupation, there was a figurehead outside the country. That was Ramos Horta, also a Nobel laureate, who proved extremely effective by being that kind of focal point person who gained international recognition as the spokesperson for Timorese independence and engaging with leadership, political leadership in countries around the world and the UN. Is there, can there be, should there be such a focal point of someone outside who can really sort of rally that kind of continuing support and try to keep, as you say, the situation in the forefront of international attention?
Well, when my father was alive, he did a great deal to keep that going. And he was instrumental in my mother having been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, which allowed more attention to be focused on Burma. And I can only say that it was a huge loss for Burma and my mother, and obviously our family, when he died. I can't live up to him, but I can try and be a focal point to some degree. At the same time, because I'm not a politician and I'm not qualified to talk to these people in many ways, I don't feel like I'm necessarily the person who should be doing it. I think there's better qualified people out there. But unfortunately, they don't have this unique position that I do. And it's very hard for them to be given that recognition as that person, to be the focal point. So whilst I do think it's needed, I don't know who the best person for the job would be.
Further comments?
I am wondering, after this being speaking in different places, can you go back to Burma?
Who knows? I'm probably on the blacklist. Most of the best people are. But I've been putting in a request for the last few years to be allowed to go and visit my mother in prison. They refuse to even acknowledge that I've put this request in. I've tried to contact them via the British Foreign Office and the International Red Cross, and I never receive any sort of response whatsoever.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your remarks. I'm learning so much today. Not following the situation actively, though, I'm wondering, could you share a little bit about your recent thoughts? You mentioned earlier about sort of being thrust into that position, or actually, maybe not thrust, but occupying a unique position with your recognition. And do you feel any pressures to formally sort of assume any roles or responsibilities in that position? Have people approached you, and how do the governments and officials that you've met with view you? Do they look for you as someone to actually step up and raise your hand as sort of a uniting force? Because I think in most governments or most countries, you have to have a unifying sort of leader sort of step up to sort of, you know, lead the changes. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are with regard to the current situation and your unique position currently.
Well, I certainly don't want to get involved in a political way. And despite that, anything I say or do can be interpreted politically. I have been trying to engage with various governments and officials around the world for the past 4 years, and they're willing to meet with me. I met with the Pope last year, and he was very sympathetic. He since then extended an invitation to my mother for sanctuary in the Vatican. And there are others around the world who certainly want to listen to what I say, and they want to be able to do something about things, but their hands are tied because their governments aren't really engaging in a meaningful way. Whilst they say big things, they don't actually get on with it. And I'm not going to try and be a focal point in that way. I'm simply here to advocate for my mother's release, for freedom for Burma, and for humanitarian aid to reach those who need it. I certainly don't want to take up any position of leadership.
Over here.
Hi, I was wondering if you have seen the movie about
you. Speak up a little bit.
Oh, yes. I was wondering if you have seen the movie about your mother, the lady, and I was wondering if that's an accurate depiction of your life.
I'm not that keen on that movie.
Oh. I understand.
That's the short answer. I have seen it, and no, it's not that accurate. You know, movies dramatize things in certain ways that turn it into something that it's not.
You mentioned earlier that you were under house arrest with your mom, and I'm wondering if you can describe for us a little bit about what that was like on a day-to-day basis.
Pretty boring as a young boy.
Like what? But if you were to describe it, what did a day look like? Like what?
Well,
could you do? What could you not do?
when she was first put under house arrest, the military rolled up in their trucks and took away all the student activists who were in the compound. They cut the phone lines, put barbed wire up around the compound, installed security posts and soldiers everywhere. And there wasn't really a great deal to do. We're not allowed to leave the compound. So my mother encouraged me to learn martial arts from one of the soldiers who was guarding the place. I'd do that in the mornings, read my books during the day, listen to music. That's about it, really, when you're under house arrest. It was actually quite a nice time in some ways because I got to spend time with my mum. We'd cook together. Yeah.
Thank you again. I'm talking about Burma and the freedom fighter, your grandpa, General Aung San. We lost him many, many years ago. We always miss him all the time. If you get a chance to bring him back into life, what would you like to run General Aung San to run the country? Thank you.
Would I like him to run the country? Not necessarily. He always said that it doesn't matter who the leader is, whether he's a Chin, a Kachin, a Mon, so long as we all get behind him. Doesn't need to be my grandfather or my mother. It just needs somebody who's willing to take that leadership role and someone that the people trust. So whilst he may have made a good leader, we're never to know because he didn't live to show what he could do. You know, he was certainly a good leader during the war, but whether that would have translated to peaceful government, who knows? I think Meme was a good leader during her time, and given the chance, she would have been able to implement huge changes in the country. She already had done. So.
So continue that question in the retrospect. Do you think your grandfather made a mistake getting the independence from England? Because if
I don't,
I mean, if under England, right? I know it's a very our life would have been better than just military.
That's probably true, but I still think he did the right thing getting independence. The fact that he was assassinated probably by the British means that the country never had the chance to see his visions be realized. Yeah, so who knows how things would have turned out if he had lived.
Okay, we have a lot of questions submitted online too, but you answer most of them except this one. Which potential role do you think Aung San Suu Kyi may have in any reconciliation process or improvement of the situation if SAC will release your mom?
Well, I still believe Meme is the most unifying force there is for Burma. And while she's getting old, she's still got her wisdom and her strength. She'll be able to guide people in the future, but it's time for other people to step forward in leadership roles now. She's done enough.
That might be the best way to wrap things up, unless you have any further sort of concluding remarks that you would like to impart to us. But otherwise, we thank you so much for not only being here, but for sharing your life experience and for speaking I think, more directly than many more qualified sort of academics would. And I think that's what's needed in a situation like this. And we're very grateful for your insights and for your taking your time to come here today and join us here at Stanford. So thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been interesting for me as well, because I haven't done this really properly like this before. I've had a couple of Q&A sessions, but some of them are harder than others if the setup isn't right. The last one I had, I think at Cornell it was, the microphone was really hard to use and just makes things very difficult. So it was nice to have this opportunity. Thank you.
Well, you're always welcome here.
Thank you.